single dad janitor shouted. "Don't get in the car!" What happened next left the CEO and entire company stunned. The warning hit the afternoon like a slap. "Ma'am, don't get in the car!" Aveline Langford's fingers were already curling around the cool chrome of the sedan's handle when the voice cut through Manhattan's layered noise. Taxis, sirens, footsteps, wind channeling between glass towers. Everything thin to a single thread, raw fear vibrating in a stranger's throat. Her two security men moved before she turned. Graves, square shoulders, navy suit cut for action, not show, stepped into her line, a living barricade. His partner broke right, intercepting a lean man in a gray janitor's uniform who had exploded from a service exit like a ghost slipping out of steel. Keys scattered across the limestone apron with a metallic skitter as the guards slammed him to the wall. "Stay back!" the man rasped, chest heaving, eyes fixed on Aveline as if distance alone might save her. Sweat slicked his hair to his temples. "Don't let her get in. The car, it isn't safe." "In position," Graves growled without looking at her, palm hovering near his inner jacket. "Night maintenance, ma'am." "He's nothing." But the word he'd used, safe, hung there like a toxic bloom. Aveline's irritation flared cold and clean. She was 12 minutes late already. A jet idled at Black Ridge, a hangar cleared under false tail numbers, a meeting calibrated to the minute. 2 years of dark funding converged on this hour. A janitor's outburst was not on the schedule. "Graves," she said, razor calm. "Explain." "Protocol," he answered, scanning rooftops, mirrors, the curve of every parked SUV. His voice hardened. "Ma'am, step away from the vehicle." To the second agent. "Lock it down." "Full sweep." "Call it in." She lifted her hand off the handle as if it were suddenly hot. The driver blinked at them from behind the windshield, pale. Within 90 seconds, the street redshifted into emergency. Cruisers boxing both ends of the block, strobes pulsing off glass, uniforms stringing tape. Strangers raised their phones like offerings to spectacle. Behind the lobby's plate glass, Aveline watched her afternoon shatter along neat fault lines: time, secrecy, control. They forced the janitor, Liam Byrne, according to the badge clipped crooked on his chest, to his knees and cuffed him. He didn't fight. Didn't speak. His eyes clung to the sleek black sedan marooned in the cordon like a shark at rest. He looked less like a saboteur than a man who'd sprinted past his limits and found only a cliff. A robot rolled out under the car's belly, camera eyes swiveling. Tech swept seams and wheel wells. K9 handlers tugged leashes tight. Aveline's reflection glared back at her from the lobby glass, immaculate suit, winter gray eyes, jaw set. She hated the waiting most of all. It ceded narrative to panic and rumor. On the sidewalk, Liam's breath fogged in short bursts. The din receded for him too, but not into silence, into memory. A pediatric neurologist's office painted with planets. The tremor that had crept into Maya's right hand, making suns wobble on paper. The doctor's voice pitched soft, as if volume could blunt content. Progressing faster than we'd hoped. A stack of pamphlets tucked into a folder with his name on it like a sympathy card. Then, the shredder bin in sublevel B, shaved paper curls that the vacuum missed. Words like bones he knelt to collect on a dirty concrete floor. Hours spent in a supply closet, tape across his knuckles, piecing letters back into anatomy. Company names he'd only ever cleaned around. Project codes with friendly masks. And under them, one phrase that had turned his blood to ice. A low metallic groan snapped him back. The bomb tech signaled, nothing. Another pass. Nothing. Panel by panel, wire by wire, the car gave up no secrets because it had none to give. The verdict came with bureaucratic finality, negative. The tape sagged. The crowd thinned. The street exhaled. What remained was the bill for chaos and Aveline Langford's temper, cold and surgical. False report. Inciting panic, an officer said as they hauled Liam upright. You're looking at charges. Stop. Aveline's heels ticked out onto the pavement like a metronome cutting a new time. Graves matched her step, one palm open to steer her back. She brushed it away without touching him. The two officers hesitated instinctively when she spoke again, lower, deadlier. Not another word. Up close, the janitor was even smaller than he'd looked folded on the pavement. But his eyes were not small. They were fixed on her the way a drowning person fixes on air. "You cost me more than you can pay back in 10 lifetimes," she said, voice barely above the street's throb. "You have 5 seconds to make a case for your existence." Graves adjusted 2 inches closer, weight over the balls of his feet. The other guard's thumb rested on his radio's push to talk. Somewhere a siren turned a corner and faded. Liam swallowed. His mouth was dust. He could say bomb. He could say threat. He could talk about the robot and the keys and the panic, all the visible things people recognize as danger. But they weren't the danger. They were the only language he'd had to stop her from opening that door and driving away from the one chance to make her hear him. All of the other words he'd reconstructed in that closet would sound crazy here on the curb in the daylight. He had one word left that might penetrate the armor she wore like skin. "Neurosynaptic decay syndrome," he said. It didn't travel far, half a step past his lips, before it detonated. The change in Aveline was microscopic to anyone else, a fractional dilation of the pupils, a breath that forgot itself on the way in, the slightest tightening at the corner of her mouth. To Liam, who had bet everything on the idea that she would know that term, it was a chasm opening. He'd hit the buried seam. The city's noise seemed to rush back all at once, the honk, the murmur, a laugh carried on wind. Graves' head tilted a hair, eyes cutting to her profile, reading what the street could not. The officers glanced between faces, sensing a frequency they couldn't hear. Aveline's expression resealed in an instant, all steel and straight lines again, but the crack had shown. A secret had been named aloud, a name she had buried under NDAs, firewalls, and her own iron denial. Hearing it from the mouth of a night shift custodian on a public sidewalk felt like a ghost stepping into sunlight. "Release him," she said without turning. "Ma'am," an officer began. "Now." The single syllable carried the weight of a dozen procurement contracts and 100 campaign donations. Cuffs clicked open. Red marks bloomed around Liam's wrists. Aveline stepped closer, close enough he could see the faint constellation of a healed scar near her jaw, something human beneath the corporate geometry. "You're coming with me," she said. "You're going to explain exactly why you know that phrase. And you're going to start by telling me your daughter's name." Behind them, Graves was already speaking into his sleeve mic, voice low. 50. Glass. Hold. The machine of Langford Industries pivoted, quiet and efficient, turning in on the man who had forced it to stop. Liam looked past Aveline at the tower's mirrored skin climbing into cold blue. He thought of Maya sitting by their apartment window, sketching a sun that didn't shake. He nodded once. He didn't know what waited behind that glass. He only knew he'd finally been heard. They marched Liam Byrne through the marble lobby and into a private elevator that rose like a sealed bullet through the tower's spine. No music. No chatter. Just the soft mechanical breath of wealth moving upward. The 50th floor conference room was a glass box cantilevered into the sky. Manhattan sprawled on 3 sides, bridges like silver stitches, the Hudson a strip of burnished steel. At the center of the room sat a single obsidian slab of a table, polished to a mirror so black it seemed to drink the light. Graves took a post by the door, a statue with a pulse. Liam stood where he was told and tried not to think about the grit drying on his janitor's uniform, the chemical smell that never quite left his hands. Time stretched. 10 minutes. 30. An hour. He imagined Maya letting herself into their apartment after school, lining up crackers and apple slices the way he'd shown her, the little tremor in her right hand making one slice skid off the plate. He imagined her checking the clock, listening for his call. The door sighed open. Aveline Langford entered without ceremony, a personal assistant at her shoulder with a tablet already unlocked. Aveline waved the aide away. The door closed. Silence fell like snow. She didn't sit. She moved, one slow orbit of the room's perimeter, fingernail trailing the glass as if taking a measure of it, of him, of the air itself. When she finally let her eyes land on Liam, they were winter gray and fathomless. Neurosynaptic decay syndrome, she said, voice level. Fewer than 2,000 diagnosed cases worldwide. How does a man who mops floors know that term? Liam clasped his shaking hands behind his back. Because my daughter has it, he said. No preamble, no apology. Maya. 7 years old. She wants to name a star after her mom. 6 months ago her right hand started to tremble. Fine motor skills are going. The neurologist at St. Jude's called it aggressive. They told me there's no treatment. Aveline's gaze didn't soften, but something in her posture changed, an almost imperceptible unclenching. And then? I found things. He swallowed. Sublevel B, shredder bin next to procurement. If you vacuum at 2 in the morning, you see what the office workers don't. Names on fragments. A project here, off the books. A trial that isn't in the public registry. A cure they're calling it. I pieced the strips together in a supply closet. His mouth tugged toward a bitter smile. Tape on my knuckles for days. Her expression didn't move, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Source of funding for this supposed trial? Your family office, he said. The Langford Initiative. And the lead subject? He met her eyes. Kellen Langford. The glass hummed with the city's wind for a beat. Aveline's jaw ticked once. Then she crossed to the table, set her tablet down, and spoke without looking at Graves. I want everything on Liam Byrne. Employment records, associates, debt, arrest history. And I want Maya Byrne's full chart from pediatric neurology, imaging, labs, clinician notes. Use my name. Expedited. Graves' answer was quiet and immediate. Yes, ma'am. Liam blinked. Why do you need her records? Because you're asking me to detonate $1 billion and my brother's last hope on your word, she said. I'm verifying the ground under your story before I step onto it. He flinched as if struck, then steadied. Let me call her, he said. 2 minutes. On speaker. You can listen to every word. She's alone after school. She'll be worried. Aveline weighed him, then tilted her head a fraction. Graves tapped his earpiece. A phone appeared, placed on the table like a piece of evidence. Liam gave the number. 2 rings. Daddy? Maya's voice was small sunshine through wire. He closed his eyes, swallowed the lump that rose like a fist. Hey, sweet pea. I'm at work late. Big leak. Lots to clean up. The lie tasted like metal. Did you have your snack? Yes. And I finished math. I drew you a castle. It has a big gate to keep monsters out. The faint wobble on castle scraped something inside him raw. That's perfect, he said, and his voice cracked. He turned it into a cough. Keep that gate strong for me, okay? Okay. I love you. I love you more. The call ended. Liam pressed his palms to the cool edge of the table and breathed. 5 floors up, where her office overlooked a different slice of the river, Aveline had routed the call through her intercom and listened. When it cut off, she stared at the skyline and saw none of it. The janitor from the sidewalk had a daughter with the same nightmare threaded through her cells as Kellen. The same tremor. The same prognosis written in sterile clinical shorthand. 45 minutes later, encrypted files hit her tablet. Aveline bypassed the credit scores and utility bills and opened the medical chart. Maya Byrne. Age 7. Diagnosis, neurosynaptic decay syndrome, stage 2. The neurologist's notes were written in tidy, almost cheerful font, as if typography could soften content. Observable decline in fine motor precision. Distal tremor increasing at rest. Consider palliative interventions. Family counseled on progression. It was a mirror. Kellen's weekly reports, stripped of name and insurance ID. The ground under Liam's story wasn't sand. It was bedrock. Aveline exhaled through her nose and opened a different set of files, internal expenditures. She skimmed past lab build-outs and cryo-storage leases, past bespoke centrifuges and negative pressure retrofits. A consulting payment snagged her eye. Helios Analytics LLC. 6 figures, recurring, flagged. Data integrity. She cracked into her private registry. Helios was a storefront, a Wyoming shell with a Las Vegas mailbox. Its sole officer, Dr. Corbin Vance. 5 years ago, the state medical board stripped his license for falsifying clinical trial data. A line of cold moved through her chest. She replayed, in merciless clarity, every moment she'd let hope override scrutiny, Finch dismissing third-party audits as time Kellen doesn't have. The glide of his charm, the whiteboard projections that grew brighter the more desperate she became. She pressed a single contact on her encrypted line. Dr. Alistair Finch answered on the first ring, his voice lacquered and smooth. Aveline. I was just about to. We'll keep this brief, she said. I'm reviewing Q3. Who is Helios Analytics? Silence, 3 seconds wide and full of flailing calculations. A clerical label, he recovered. We occasionally consult historical literature. You know how messy raw data can be. And Dr. Corbin Vance consults on your integrity? She let the question hang in a vacuum. That man was railroaded. Finch snapped, the polish slipping. Aveline, with respect, I won't have my ethics impugned by accountants. Our trajectory is unprecedented. Your brother is. Spare me, she said, voice flat. Don't touch the servers. Don't touch my brother. I'll be in touch. She cut the line, then stood staring at the black mirror of the table until her reflection blurred. Doubt had slipped a knife between her ribs at the curb, now it twisted. When she stepped back into the glass room on 50, Liam was pacing. Graves watched him with the neutral intensity of a lighthouse. Aveline set the tablet down between them and turned the screen so Liam could see. A corporate shell. A headshot of Vance, eyes too bright, smile too hungry. A disciplinary order. You weren't wrong, she said, and the admission cost her more than money. Finch is paying a data doctor who was barred for faking results. Color drained from Liam's face. Then Kellen is alive, she said, and let him have that much. And in danger. He swallowed. So what happens now? Aveline looked past him, out over a city that had always been hers to maneuver, and felt, for the first time in years, the ground tilt under her feet. No, she said. We stop pretending the front door is an option. Graves' phone vibrated once. He glanced at it, then up. Say the word, ma'am. Aveline's gaze returned to Liam. The chasm between CO and custodian hadn't closed, but a bridge had appeared, thin, improvised, load-bearing all the same. Tell me everything you found, she said. Every name. Every schedule. Don't edit. We don't get a second pass. And Liam Byrne, the man who cleaned around secrets until one of them cut his hands, began to talk. Graves slid a tablet across the obsidian table, its screen blooming with layered blueprints, utility chases, HVAC trunks, drainage lines. Aveline didn't sit. Security posture? Fortress, Graves said. Single access road, electrified perimeter, motion grid, armed response in under 4 minutes. Main entrance is a dead man's switch. Liam stood closer than he had any right to, eyes scanning the negative space between buildings instead of the obvious doors. There, he said, tapping a thin line skirting the northern wall. Industrial sanitation conduit for acidic runoff. It ties into a drainage culvert about half a mile outside the fence. Graves' brow creased. 30 inches across. Hazard signage. It's piped straight into their waste processor. You'd cook alive if they flush. They won't, between 2 and 4 a.m., Liam answered. Maintenance window on the primary filtration system. I saw the schedule in procurement's shred. At night they put the lab in standby to cut power burn. Aveline's gaze sharpened, turning appraisal into decision. We don't use the doors they expect, she said. We use the ones they forgot. She pivoted to Graves. Pull the schematics to my jet. Headsets, low light, pry tools, breaching kit, non-GPS comms. Quiet. No paper trail. Yes, ma'am. 2 hours later the jet skimmed into a black lacquer sky, Manhattan a fractured constellation behind them. Liam sat bolt upright in a cream leather seat, janitor's uniform looking like a costume in this world of stitched lambskin and whispering vents. Across the aisle, Aveline worked the tablet, rearranging routes and contingencies with the field commander's economy. Graves inventoried compact devices with ritual precision. The engine's hum made a soft, steady floor for words that didn't come easily. Tell me about her, Aveline said at last, not looking up. Liam blinked. Who? Maya. He swallowed. She's 7. She asks 100 questions before breakfast. Favorite color's yellow. She says it's the sun right when it wakes up. She wants to be an astronomer. Says she'll name a star after her mom. The last sentence snagged his breath. He let the silence hold it. Aveline's eyes stayed on the tablet, but her voice dropped an octave. Kellen used to sail. He'd steer straight out until the skyline dissolved and say the ocean makes problems shrink to scale. Last month he told me he just wanted to feel the sun without feeling like he was fading underneath it. For a moment they weren't CEO and custodian. They were two people inventorying the same enemy by different names. The jet exhaled them into a cold, pine-scented dark. They hiked soundless under a lattice of branches until the chain-link fence rose ahead, razor wire catching the starlight. The facility hunched beyond, low, windowless, built to be unseen from the road. The culvert was half buried in weeds, concrete mouth stained with mineral ghosts. Chemical tang hung in the air. Graves cut the rusted grate. 2:15, he whispered, slipping night vision goggles into their hands. Filtration offline another hour 45. If we're not out by 4, we don't get out. The crawl turned the world into a tube of damp, stinging air and greenlit metal. Knees slid through cold residue. Breath bounced back hot and loud. Every scrape sounded like a scream. Liam led by touch and memory, counting seams and bends the way only someone who'd lived his life behind walls would. Graves stopped hard, palm up. Ahead, vertical bars crossed the conduit. Beyond them, a huge, dim sub-basement opened like a ship's hold, pumps, ducts, shadowed alcoves. He lifted a compact hydraulic spreader, but froze before seating it. Through the grill, 2 men moved, black utility gear, soft-soled boots, compact submachine guns resting as if they belonged there. Not guards. Operators. They were loading sealed white biohazard containers onto a pallet by a freight elevator. Graves' murmur barely stirred the air. This isn't standby. They're staging an exfil. Aveline's whisper had iron in it. Finch accelerated after my call. Liam's stomach went cold. In his head, a shredded line item snapped into focus. Transport and disposal, biowaste class 7. The pickup he thought was at dawn was happening now. They're not patrolling, Graves said, reading lanes and angles. Straight sideline from here to the floor. We step out, we're cut down. Panic tried to climb. Liam shoved it off, forced himself to visualize the map as he taped it together, duct to shaft to service core. The lab dumbwaiter, he whispered. North wall. 20 yards. It runs vertical. We can bypass the open floor. Across open floor, Graves countered. Make them look the other way, Aveline said, already fishing a device from Graves' pack. Something loud. Not lethal. Graves thumbed an electromagnetic charge, sighted it through the bars at an East Corridor junction box. Flash and pop. 30 yards. On my mark. Then you run. He counted down with fingers. 3, 2, 1. The flash detonated in blue-white silence, followed by a window-shaking crack. The far corridor exploded into darkness. Alarm strobes woke snarling red. The 2 operators snapped around, weapons shouldered, moving toward the noise with predator economy. Go! Graves hissed, driving the spreader into the grill. Metal shrieked, bars bent. They spilled onto slick concrete, a 3-body scramble low and fast, boots whispering. The 20 yards to the wall stretched like a football field in a bad dream. Liam hit the recess panel, fingers slipping on grease, found the lip of the dumbwaiter door and yanked. Locked. Graves was there, jammed a pry bar, leveraged his shoulders. The panel screamed and popped. He shoved them in, then folded himself inside, pulling the door to as a flashlight beam scythed the wall where they'd been. The box smelled like hot bearings and old soap. Liam's thumb found the cracked-up button. The chain grabbed with a lurch, the cab grinding upward, a chorus of metal on metal loud enough to write their location on every sensor in the building. Medical's 3rd floor. Liam breathed. The cab shuddered to a halt. Beyond the thin door, brightness and silence. Graves eased a slit. A sterile corridor stretched past, polished floor, closed doors, the distant murmur of machines. A gurney rolled into view, pushed by 2 orderlies in scrubs, a sheeted body still as stone. Dr. Alistair Finch paced beside it, checking his watch with clinical boredom. At the far end, a freight elevator chimed, doors parted. The gurney slid in. Finch followed. Doors closed. Aveline made a sound Liam had never heard from another human being, a strangled sob of grief turning to combustion. She lunged for the handle. Graves' hand clamped on her shoulder and dragged her back into shadow. "You open, we die," he breathed. "You want to save him, you think?" The elevator swallowed the gurney and the doctor. The corridor returned to its quiet hum. For a heartbeat nothing existed but the echo of doors closing. "No," Liam said, and the words steadied him. "It's wrong." Aveline's eyes were knives. "Say it fast. Why parade your asset down the main hall, under cameras, under motion? Why a sheet and not a secured pod if it's waste? Finch expected you to make noise. He's planting a ghost trail for investigators to find later." Hope and fury lit together in Aveline's face. She yanked the tablet out, blueprints blooming. Liam leaned in, finger tracing. Not a new room. An old one. Somewhere off the upgrade path. He tapped a gray blotch at the far end of the wing. Surgical Theater 3, decommissioned. Aveline pinched to zoom. A hairline shaft peeled off the main elevators. Service lift isolated. Drops to a loading dock outside the main network. A ghost exit, Liam said. The freight elevator at the far end chimed again. Finch and the orderlies stepped back out, no gurney. They turned away, voices low, satisfied. "No," Graves said, and slid the dumbwaiter door open the last inch. They bled into the corridor, shadows within light, hugging the wall toward the decommissioned wing. The brightness thinned, fixtures spread wider. At the end, heavy double doors waited, brushed steel with a small wired window showing only a panel of dark. A keypad blinked red. Graves' assessment was quick and grim. "Mag seal. Encrypted. I'd need a torch and time." Aveline leaned her forehead to the cool metal and went still. From the other side, faint and fragile, a cardiac monitor beat in steady triplets. Alive. Liam scanned the skirting board, the dust lines, the forgotten hardware old buildings used to talk to themselves. A small metal plate sat near the floor, its lettering scuffed thin but legible under grime. Emergency atmospheric purge control. "I can't open the door," he said, hard kicking. "But I can make them open it." Aveline straightened, following his gaze. Understanding flashed, hard and merciless. "Do it," she said. On the other side of the steel, machines breathed and a life balanced. In the corridor, Liam knelt with a multi-tool and started to turn the first stubborn screw. The last screw surrendered with a brittle squeal. Liam pried off the dust-caked plate to reveal a single industrial lever inside, insulated, scarred, painted a sun-faded red. A cracked decal warned in block letters, "Activation will purge room atmosphere." He looked up. Aveline's face was pale but steady, eyes fixed and bright. She gave one hard nod. Liam gripped the lever with both hands and pulled. For a heartbeat, nothing. Then the floor thrummed. Somewhere deep in the building, turbines wound up from a low moan to a hungry roar. A red beacon above the steel doors began to strobe, painting the corridor in slow, arterial flashes. From inside the sealed room, the serene beep of a heart monitor spiked into a frantic shriek. Metal buckled. A hiss of pressure. The magnetic seal on the door thunked open. The doors blew outward. Dr. Alistair Finch stumbled into the hallway, clawing at his collar, his face flushed purple from the sudden vacuum. Behind him lurched an older man with a thin gray comb-over and terror-bright eyes, Dr. Corbin Vance, the disgraced consultant. Both men dragged air into their lungs like drowning victims. They looked up and froze. Graves stepped from the shadow with a suppressed pistol held low but rock steady. On your knees. Hands on your head. It wasn't a request. Vance collapsed so fast his knees barked against tile. Finch hesitated, rage warring with calculation, then knelt with a hiss, fingers lacing behind his skull. Aveline didn't spare them a glance. She swept past into the decommissioned theater. The room was a time capsule of stainless steel and shadow, banks of unused autoclaves along the wall, a burned-out observation gallery above, and in the center, under the thin, hissing breath of the purge system, an operating bed ringed by monitors flashing alarms. Kellen Langford lay there, frighteningly still. His skin had the thin waxiness of long illness. Tubes ran from both arms. Sensor leads mapped his chest in a jittering constellation. Kellen! Aveline whispered, voice snagging. She was at his side in a step, hands hovering before she forced herself to look at the numbers instead of the man. Pulse screaming high, SpO2 diving, blood pressure threadbare. Finch's voice floated in from the hall, feral and triumphant. You have no idea what you've interrupted. That protocol was stabilizing him. You've killed. Shut up, Graves said so evenly it chilled the air. Liam moved to the far side of the bed, eyes scanning not the screens but the lines, the simple mechanics beneath the theater of machines. For 4 bags hung from a stand, 3 hospital-standard clear fluids with barcode labels and 1, different. Smaller. Amber-colored. No label. Its line was a thinner gauge, routed under the bed frame and into a secondary port on Kellen's forearm as if someone had wanted it there, but not seen. That one, Liam said, pointing. It doesn't belong. Aveline followed his finger. The amber bag pulsed a drop, another, snaking poison into a vein. She didn't hesitate. She pinched the line and ripped the catheter free. The amber fluid dripped onto white linoleum, spreading like tea against snow. For 3 endless seconds the monitor still screamed, then stuttered, then began to settle, peaks smoothing, valleys rising, a ragged rhythm knitting itself into something that looked like life. Beep. 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 Aveline's breath left her in a sob she strangled halfway. Her hand closed over Kellen's, light, as if he might shatter, and stayed there. Outside, a shout went up. Heavy boots pounded. The building had found its intruders. Graves backed into the room, gun sweeping the doorway. Company, he said. 2, maybe 4. Moving fast. Barricade it. Aveline snapped, already stripping the non-essential lines. Get me a way out. They heaved a dead bank of monitors on casters across the threshold. The steel doors shuddered as something slammed into them from the hall once, then again, the impacts too disciplined to be panic. The wired window crazed into a spiderweb. Service lift, Liam said, yanking his memory back to the map. Old freestanding elevator shaft in this wing, doesn't tie into main systems. It drops to a loading dock. Back wall, Aveline said, rolling Kellen's gurney toward a row of obsolete sterilizers. Behind the autoclaves. Graves moved with them, eyes never leaving the door. 30 seconds, he said. Maybe less. They muscled the heavy steel cabinets aside, the legs screeching across tile. Sweat ran cold down Liam's back, his forearms burned. Behind the last unit, flush with the wall, sat a narrow, unmarked metal door with a grease-darkened handle and a scab of a maintenance panel next to it. Graves fired 2 quick rounds into the lock, muffled pops that still rattled Liam's ribs. The latch shattered. The door banged open to reveal a waist-deep sill and a squat elevator car sitting level with the floor, cracked black enamel walls, a cage gate, a big manual crank wheel bolted to the shaft frame like a ship's helm. The theater door boomed. A hinge gave with a wrenching groan. "Now!" Graves barked. He grabbed Finch by the collar and flung him face down in a corner, zip-tying his wrists in 3 swift loops. Vance was already whimpering, hands high. Graves hog-tied him where he knelt and kicked him out of the way. Aveline and Liam wedged the gurney through the narrow maintenance door, angling legs and swinging 4 stands. The wheels caught, then bumped over the sill into the tiny car. Kellen's monitors, now on battery, beeped a fragile steady time that set Liam's teeth on edge with every note. The steel theater door bowed inward, then snapped back. A battering ram pounded again. A seam in the frame turned from hairline to visible. Graves glanced once toward the sound, then at Aveline, and the gurney jammed in the car. He slung the pistol to his chest and put both hands on the manual crank. "I'll ride the brake," he said, voice calm in a way that made Liam's stomach drop. "You two keep him steady." Another hit. The wired glass blew inward in glittering sugar. A black muzzle poked through the gap. A burst chewed the top corner of the autoclave they'd shoved aside. Graves spun the wheel. The service car lurched, gears shrieking, then began to descend, the shaft swallowing light into greasy darkness. The last thing Liam saw through the gap before the cage gate rattled shut was Graves turning back toward the door, shoulders squared, gun coming up as a silhouette flooded the threshold. The car rattled down, faster, a controlled fall held together by old metal and a man's strength. The shaft howled. Sparks peeled from somewhere above and rained ochre. Kellen's monitor kept time, stubborn and thin. "Hold him," Aveline said, knuckles white on the gurney rail as the car slammed past the second landing. "Just hold him." The service elevator screamed into the dark, and above them, the theater filled with the sound of war. The service car dropped like a stone. Metal screamed. The shaft turned into a wind tunnel, hot air clawing up past them while old cables shrieked in protest. Aveline threw her weight against the gurney, forearms braced across Kellen's chest rails to keep him from pitching sideways. Liam wrapped one arm around a rattling stanchion and used the other to pin the 4 poles so the lines wouldn't rip out. Somewhere above, the world they just set on fire hammered and howled. Here in the throat of the building, all sound narrowed to grinding steel and the thin, stubborn beeping of a portable heart monitor riding the plunge with them. The car hit bottom hard enough to knock the breath out of them. The impact punched the floor up into Liam's knees, ricocheted through his spine, and set dust blooming in the dark like a silent explosion. For a second, too, everything went black. "Talk to me," Aveline said into the darkness, voice tight but unbroken. "I'm here," Liam answered, finding his own breath. His fingers flew by feel across the monitor's casing, slapping the battery toggle back on. A green diode winked awake. Beep, beep, beep. Thin but steady. "Kellen?" Aveline's hands found his wrist, then the side of his throat. A pulse answered, faint and fast. She exhaled once, a controlled spill of relief, then snapped back to motion. "We move!" Liam found the manual release in the wall by running his palm along the cold metal until it snagged on a recessed lever. He hauled. The cage gate protested, then rasped open 3 jagged feet. They angled the gurney and shouldered it through, wheels clacking over a crooked sill. They spilled into a cavernous subterranean loading dock, concrete and shadow, a single bare bulb stuttering to life on a motion sensor and throwing long, twitching silhouettes. Diesel ghosts hung in the air. To their left, a line of delivery trucks sat silent. Ahead, a rolling steel door sealed the bay from the access road. Somewhere a sump pump coughed. "Exit?" Aveline asked, already scanning. "Main bay door," Liam said, pointing at the corrugated slab. "But they'll have it on a local lockout. If the upstairs alarm's tripped, the controller will be dead." He swept his light along the cinderblock wall. "Secondary options, electrical room, air curtain override, or we make our own door." He jogged to the nearest truck, a white box rig with company branding half-peeled from its sides. The driver's door was locked. He smashed the passenger glass with a wall-mounted fire extinguisher, reached in, and popped the latch. The cabin smelled like cold coffee and rubber. Keys weren't in the ignition. "Can you hotwire it?" Aveline asked, already wheeling the gurney toward the loading line. Faster, Liam said, ducking under the dash panel. He popped it free, stripped 2 thick leads with his teeth and a pocket blade, sparked them together. The starter coughed, then caught. The engine growled to life, echoing in the concrete belly. Aveline had already planted her back against the rolling door's manual chain. "If I lift, can you shoot it?" she called. "I don't have a gun," Liam said, climbing across the bench and dropping to the floor. "I wasn't asking you," she answered, jaw set. She yanked the chain. The steel door jumped 3 inches and jammed against its lockpins with a teeth-aching clang. Liam grabbed the gurney's foot and shoved. They loaded Kellen into the cargo bay, secured the fore-pole in a corner bracket with a ratchet strap, and wedged the monitor so it wouldn't tumble. Aveline climbed into the back, planted her feet on either side of the wheels, and gripped the rails. "Drive," she said. "If it doesn't open, drive through." Liam slammed the truck into gear, rolled forward, and tested the door with a nudge. The slab shuddered. He reversed 20 feet, breath steadying in the space between one choice and the next, then buried the accelerator. The box truck hit the rolling door like a battering ram. Corrugated steel screamed and folded. The second impact tore the pins. Sunless pre-dawn air knifed in as the slab belled outward and flopped down, dragging across the cab's roof with a scream of metal on paint. They burst into the open, tires hopping the dock lip to the access road. The facility loomed low and dark behind them. In the rearview, red strobes skittered across concrete like angry insects. "Headlights off," Aveline called from the cargo bay. "Keep it dark until you hit the trees." Liam killed the lights and drove by feel and memory. He'd studied this service road on a blueprint, and then again in his head. The asphalt bent right, then straightened, then dipped toward a stand of pines that would swallow them whole. He kept the speed just below screaming, hands steady at 10 and 2, mouth dry, eyes cutting to the mirror with every heartbeat. "Status," he called over his shoulder. "Pulse present. Pressure climbing," Aveline reported, all boardroom clippedness burned away to bare competence. Whatever was in that amber line, it was the knife. Without it, his body's fighting. A mile out, where the trees closed in and the road kinked under a power line, Liam braked and pulled into a shallow turnout swallowed by brush. He killed the engine. The sudden quiet roared. "Now we buy time," Aveline said. She dropped to the asphalt, flipped open a satellite handset the size of a brick, and punched a number from muscle memory. The line picked up on the second ring. "Evans," a dry voice said, "No hello?" "Director Evans, this is Aveline Langford," she said, every word packed with authority and something close to fury. "I am declaring a clear and present threat at the North Valley Research Facility. I have direct evidence of illegal human experimentation, conspiracy to commit murder, and ongoing destruction of federally regulated clinical data. Subjects are armed. Your window to contain is measured in minutes." A beat. No surprise on the other end, only motion. "Your location? 1 mile north-northeast on the service road. We have a critical patient, Kellen Langford, stabilized but in need of immediate evacuation. The facility is moving to liquidate assets and exfiltrate data. You will not have a second bite." "Copy," Evans said. Paper rustled, that old habit of writing by hand, even when it would all be typed later. "Secure line stays open. Do not re-enter the site. Medevac inbound to your ping. TC6 wheels up in 3. She closed the handset and looked at Liam. In the reflected gray of the clouded sky, she looked younger and more dangerous than she ever had in polished glass. "We wait 30 seconds. Then we move to a rendezvous point and hand this to the federal government." Liam nodded, then looked at her hands, bloodless knuckles still gripping the phone, and thought of Graves 5 floors up, alone with 2 prisoners and a breach team. "Graves?" he asked, the name heavier than the word should have been. Aveline stared past him into the trees. For a long second she said nothing. When she spoke, it was a fact she was forcing through a throat that wanted to close. "He bought us 30 seconds, she said. "I intend to spend them." They rolled again, slower, keeping to the shoulder until the road opened onto a county blacktop where the world returned. Mailboxes, a sleeping farmhouse, the distant glow of a town that didn't know a war had just been fought under its feet. A mile farther, the first roadblock rose out of the dawn, unmarked SUVs angled across the lanes, men and women in windbreakers and body armor ghosting into position, palms up in the universal sign for stop. Liam eased the truck to a halt. The scene reconfigured around them with terrifying competence. Medics swept the cargo bay. An agent with clipped hair and a notebook clocked Aveline and saluted without ceremony. Another team took the truck's tail, weapons down but ready. Langford? A woman with frost in her hair and kindness absent from her face appeared at Liam's window, flashed a shield, and then didn't bother with introductions. We've got him. Step out slow. They moved like choreography. Kellen's gurney slid from the cargo bay to a waiting medevac unit in an exhale of practiced hands. Lines reconnected. Monitors swapped. Rotors chopped the morning. An agent tried to start a question with a lawyer's careful vowels. Aveline cut him off without looking. You'll have my statement in 1 hour. She pointed to Liam. Stays with me. Over the pines, a swarm of black helicopters broke the horizon, banking low toward the facility. The sound announced itself in Liam's bones first, a building thunder that became a physical presence in the air. He watched them vector, fast and precise, and a strange, exhausted laugh shook out of him. What? Aveline asked, eyes tracking her brother's medevac as it lifted. I told Maya to keep the gate strong, he said. Looks like the cavalry brought a battering ram. The medevac banked, rose, and arrowed toward the city. Aveline stood rooted, the downdraft shredding her hair, dirt streaking her cheekbone like war paint. For a heartbeat, the two of them looked like they didn't belong to any world but this one, between the place where monsters are made and the place where people go home. Graves, Liam said again, softer now that the noise could hide doubt. She swallowed and didn't answer. Instead, she reached into the cab, picked up the satellite handset, and set it on the seat. We're not done, she said. Not with Finch. Not with the people who paid him. And not with the lie they sold me when I was too desperate to see straight. Liam looked at the empty road stretching ahead, dawn bleeding into the clouds, and felt the ground of his life tilt into a new shape. He glanced back at the truck's cargo bay, where a coil of straps still swung from the ceiling, rocking to a rhythm that wasn't panic anymore. Then we keep moving, he said. Then we keep moving, Aveline echoed. Behind them, the helicopters dropped onto the compound like a dark tide. Ahead of them, the first honest day in months began. By the time the convoy cleared the first ridge, the county fairgrounds had become a forward command post, floodlights stabbing the thinning night, generators chugging, pop-up tents stenciled with federal seals. Liam stepped out of the truck into organized thunder. Radios crackled. Agents moved like chess pieces. Somewhere close, a helicopter idled, its rotors chopping the morning into quarters. Aveline was swept into a blue-lit triage tent without ever losing control of the room. Where is he? She demanded, and a medic pointed her past rows of cots to a curtained bay. Kellen's gurney floated through on a tide of quiet competence. 2 medics at the head, one at the pump cart, another reading off vitals. He was pale, but the frantic zigzag of his heart had settled into a rhythm that looked human. An air medic leaned down, spoke low to Aveline as they walked. Good response to withdrawal of the unknown infusion. We've stabilized pressure and oxygen. He's strong enough for transport. We'll keep the central line and take him to St. Bartholomew's Neuro ICU under federal protective custody. Aveline's fingers found the rail, curled there for a beat. I'll follow, she said. It sounded like an oath. Director Evans materialized at Liam's elbow, the kind of man whose presence arrives before he does. Steel hair, raincoat thrown over a ballistic vest, legal pad tucked under one arm like an extension of his hand. His voice was low and unsentimental. Mr. Byrne. Ms. Langford says you don't do well with doors you're told not to open. Let's put that to use. Walk me from the top. They sat at a folding table beside a humming generator. Evans let Liam talk without interruption. Shredder bin, reassembled papers, Helios Analytics, the post-transfer asset liquidation. Phrase that read like a corporate euphemism until you saw a man under a sheet. When Liam faltered, Evans supplied the word he was groping for, not to help but to see whether Liam recognized it. He did. Finch? Liam asked finally. Did you? Evans flipped a page in his pad. Taken into custody with Dr. Corbin Vance. Both alive. Your friend Graves knocked 4 operators unconscious and disarmed a 5th before our team breached. He was down to 1 magazine. Evans's mouth twitched, a movement that might have been respect. He's en route to City General. Critical but holding. Liam's breath left his lungs like a door opening. He hadn't realized he'd been bracing for something worse until he wasn't. I need to, he began. You'll get to him, Evans said, not unkind. First, we need your hands on a keyboard. They moved to a tech tent where a clutch of analysts worked under a halo of monitors. Chain of custody cameras were already rolling, stamping every click with time and GPS. On one screen, live feeds from the North Valley servers ticked through as federal technicians imaged racks of drives under the watch of armed marshals. On another, an agent narrated evidence tags into a 4K lens while gloved hands lifted that Amber 4 bag into a biohazard case. Helios, Evans said, tapping the corner of a monitor. We traced the shell to a Las Vegas mail drop, then to a Cayman service provider. We'll roll it up, but we need keywords for the search warrants to stick. Project names, euphemisms, internal slang. You have an ear for their ghosts. Liam slid into a chair like a man stepping into a river he knew the current of. He listed what he'd taped back together in a closet: Elenid version 3.2, Shaw Shadow Invoices, Cobalt Serum, as an internal nickname for the Amber infusion. Clean edits. For falsified data runs, aftercare. For post-failure disposal, the transport company listed as Atria Biosanitation. The analysts translated his memory into Boolean strings without looking away from the screens. A shout went up at the far end of the tent. Got one, a tech called. On the central display, an email thread opened between Finch and Vance. Buried at the bottom, under a chain of sanitized updates, was a single attachment: cobalt_efficacy_internal_appendix.xlsx. A second later, a spreadsheet bloomed, mortality curves spiking in the arm that received the Amber infusion, survival curves flattening only when the line was discontinued. In the comments column, Vance had written, recommend aggressive protocol to outpace natural decline metrics on paper. Evans didn't swear. He didn't have to. The room did it for him, under breaths through teeth. A court stenographer would later call what passed across his face probable cause made visible. He turned slightly, just enough that Liam would have to see him clearly. This is where I say thank you, and this is where I say be careful. There are people who will decide very quickly that your usefulness ended when you said Helios out loud. He nodded toward the tent flap where a private detail waited, dark suits made suddenly small by the grid of federal bodies moving past them. Ms. Langford intends to make sure you don't disappear. I intend the same for her. At St. Bartholomew's, the world narrowed to antiseptic and glass. The neuro ICU sat at the top of a tower with a view that made suffering look like an administrative error. Kellen Langford disappeared behind doors marked with red lights and soft sounds. A nurse with eyes like she'd seen everything and believed most of it pressed a laminated card into Aveline's hand. We'll page you if anything changes. In a smaller wing of the same hospital, an orange light blinked outside a trauma bay where the smell of cauterized air still clung to the curtains. Graves lay under a white sheet that made him look almost domestic if you didn't count the lines in his arms and the bruises flowering under his ribs. He blinked awake when Aveline stepped in, tried to sit up, and gave up when Payne spoke first. You disobeyed a direct order, he said, voice roughened by oxygen. You were supposed to leave me. You're my employee, she said, and the word came out gentler than it had any right to. You don't get to make my decisions for me. His mouth twitched. Good. I hate paperwork. She put a hand on the rail. You bought us 30 seconds, she said. No, he corrected softly. You did. Liam hovered 2 steps back from the bed, suddenly unsure of his right to be in a room where lives were measured in service and salary. Graves looked past Aveline and found him. You did good, he said, as if they just resurfaced from a dive no one had planned. She doesn't say that often. Listen when she does. Thank you, Liam said, and meant something larger. A public relations inferno ignited by sundown. By 9 a.m., a drone shot of black helicopters over the North Valley compound led every network. Commentators tried to pronounce neurosynaptic decay syndrome without making it sound like a plot device. Stock tickers crawled. The Langford Industries board called an emergency session in a wood-paneled room 3 blocks from the tower, half the directors in person, the rest squares on an immaculate screen. Aveline walked in 5 minutes late without apology, flanked by counsel and a woman in a dark blazer who copied nothing and saw everything. The chairman tried to start with concern about optics. She cut him off with a phrase no one had expected to hear from her mouth. I was wrong. The words took the oxygen out of the room. She put a stack of printed exhibits on the table. Helios payments, the disciplinary order against Vance, an email from Finch refusing third-party audit with the line Kellen can't afford the delay, and a printout of the mortality curves. When a director asked whether these were contextualized, she slid him a second page containing the same numbers in Finch's glossy investor deck. They didn't match. I authorized these expenditures, she said. I suspended normal controls because I let Hope do my due diligence. My brother is alive because a janitor refused to let me walk to my car. Dr. Finch is in federal custody because I stopped defending a lie that flattered me. If you need my resignation to shore up your quarter, draft it. If you want your company to survive this decade, let me burn this rot out of our house. Silence held, long enough to be respect or calculation. It broke when the oldest director, who had made and lost fortunes in businesses that dirted every pair of hands they touched, nodded once. Do it, he said. She did. In an hour, Finch's contract was terminated for cause. Helios was named in a civil complaint that would later become a criminal referral. The company's internal audit was turned outward and over to an independent firm with instructions to be unkind. In a move that would earn her 3 new enemies and a headline she didn't read, Aveline called for the dissolution of the subsidiary that had funded North Valley, and pledged the proceeds to a new entity. Back at the hospital, Liam watched all of this from a waiting room that had tried to disguise itself as a living room and failed. A social worker approached with the careful walk of someone wearing bad news in their pocket. Mr. Byrne? Maya's neighbor called when she couldn't reach you. We went by to check. She's okay, but we can't leave a minor alone overnight. Do you have someone who can sit with her? Panic rose so fast it made his head swim. I can call my cousin. He's in Yonkers. But I'll send a car, Aveline said from the doorway, already tapping a number. She'll stay at the hospital. There's a pediatric suite 2 floors down. She belongs here. The social worker blinked. Are you? She's under our protection, Aveline said, not looking up. For as long as it takes. That night, Maya arrived in a swirl of 2 big hoodie and nervous eyes. She walked into the room like a small planet unsure of its orbit until she saw her father. Then everything else fell away. Liam knelt, arms open, and she crashed into him, the sketchbook between them scrunching. He breathed her in, crayons and apples and the shampoo he bought on sale. Her right hand trembled less than it had last week. It wasn't nothing. Big gate? She asked into his shoulder. Strong as a mountain, he said. Down the hall, through glass he pretended he couldn't see through, Aveline watched them and allowed herself to feel the knife twist of envy that came with love when it had been rationed by hospital visiting hours and NDAs. She turned away before it made her impractical. By morning, the first wave of forensic reports began to surface. The amber infusion, codenamed Cobalt, resembled nothing in any registered trial protocol. It was a recombinant vector dose far above the safety band, designed to push short-term neuronal firing spikes that could be graphed as improvement, before catastrophic system failure would reset the curve. The language in Vance's emails had been careful enough to fool a lawyer, too sloppy to fool a mother who reads between lines for a living. Evans brought a printed sheet to the window where Aveline stood. "You should see this," he said. It was a requisition request from Finch to procurement stamp 2 days old. Waste partner to move Class 7 assets at 0600. Post-transfer asset liquidation as per protocol. Attached was a route map from the decommissioned surgical theater's service elevator to the loading dock and a time-on-target column that left exactly 8 minutes for the walk. "He planned to move your brother like he was a bag of lab trash," Evans said. "He planned to erase the part of the story that doesn't fit on a slide," she answered, and the quiet in her voice was more dangerous than anger. "Next steps," Evans said. "We'll hold Finch without bail. We'll flip Vance. We'll lean on Shaw's general counsel until the whole tree shakes. You." Aveline looked down at the city, flat and bright and indifferent. "I keep a promise." That afternoon, she sat across from a semicircle of neurologists who had flown in from 3 time zones when they read the word Langford and then Burn in the same email. She slid them a drive. "This is the real data," she said. "Not the deck he sold me. Start with vector safety and work forward from 0. Assume nothing good about what you're about to see. And tell me what is real." "And funding?" asked the woman from Stanford, sharp-eyed and already calculating lab time. "Not a constraint," Aveline said. In the quiet after the meeting, Liam found her in a corner of the pediatric floor where murals tried to turn fear into something you could outgrow. Maya had fallen asleep with a book open on her chest. A cartoon sun smiled down from the wall like it had nothing else to do. "I don't know how to say thank you for any of this," he said. "You don't have to," she replied. "You already did." He frowned. "When?" "When you pointed at the bag," she said. "When you spoke a word on a sidewalk I'd spent 2 years pretending I couldn't hear." They stood in companionable silence until the nurse with the world-weary eyes drifted past and murmured, "Your brother just blinked on command." Aveline didn't run. She walked fast, which was her version of running, and slipped into the neuro ICU where glass hummed and machines kept vigil. Kellen lay under soft light that made his skin look like paper left too long in the sun. She took his hand and said his name once. His eyelids twitched, then lifted half an inch. A miracle is sometimes nothing more than a millimeter in the right direction. "Hey," she whispered, and the word broke her. "We're here." In the hall outside, Graves, gray but awake, stood guard in a hospital gown with an 4-pole like a ridiculous standard. He saw Liam mid-apology and cut him off. "Don't," he said. "We all did our jobs. You just learned yours late." "So what now?" Liam asked, because the question had been chasing him since the elevator fell. "Now we hold the line," Graves said, eyes on the door, jaw set. "And we make sure the next time some suit says asset liquidation, there's 100 of you in every supply closet in this city ready to hear what the building is trying to tell them." Somewhere deep in the hospital's belly, a printer chattered out a list of lab requisitions with a new fund code at the top. In a corner office 3 floors down, a lawyer finished drafting articles of incorporation for a thing that didn't exist yesterday and would change everything tomorrow. They hadn't won. Not yet. But the day no longer felt like something that happened to them. It felt like something they were writing. By noon the next day, Manhattan looked like the center of a storm someone had drawn on a map and then made real. Satellite trucks ringed St. Bartholomew's. Cable anchors learned to pronounce neurosynaptic. Stock tickers bled red. Inside, a sterile conference room on the pediatric floor had been converted into a war room, whiteboards layered with timelines, procurement trails, and names that would eventually become defendants. Aveline stood at the head of the table in a slate jacket, hair pulled back like a decision. 3 tracks, she said. Criminal, clinical, and corporate. Evans has point on the first. I hold the second and third. Director Evans leaned on one hip, legal pad open, a pen ticking down the margin. U.S. Attorney is drafting a conspiracy and wire fraud complaint against Finch and Vance. Judge Hollister will see an initial appearance by morning. Separate grand jury for the Shaw Network. Shaw is filing an emergency injunction, Aveline said, sliding a thin stack of paper onto the table as if it were already a footnote. The top page bore the heading Temporary Restraining Order, Trade Secrets and Misappropriation. They'll argue our seizure and cooperation violate their proprietary research. We'll argue human life isn't proprietary, Evans said. But understand this, injunction or not, they'll keep fighting in court and in the dark. Liam listened, hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee he couldn't taste. A wall-mounted TV pushed a crawl of outrage and speculation the room ignored. In the glass behind the table, his reflection looked thinner than he felt. Where do I fit? He asked. Aveline met his eyes. In all three. He spent the next 2 hours with federal analysts, turning the private taxonomy of a building into evidence. Helios's pet words. Finch's rhythms. Which procurement officer always rounded a figure up instead of down? The way, aftercare, appeared only when a mortality curve spiked. The analysts listened like cryptographers, translating lived detail into queries and warrants. Just before 2, a nurse stuck her head in. Ms. Langford? Your brother's sedation is lightning. You might get a window. Aveline didn't run. She walked quickly down the hall and stopped at the threshold, breath checked as if stepping into cold water. Kellen lay under a different, warmer light. When she said his name, his eyelids fluttered, then opened a millimeter more than yesterday. Not much. Everything. Hey, she whispered, hand finding his. Ocean later. Sun first. His hand answered by the smallest pressure. She didn't move until the nurse cleared her throat gently. On her way back, she nearly collided with a man pushing a stainless biomed cart, blue coveralls, badge clipped straight, the cart labeled with a tidy vinyl sticker. He murmured, "Excuse me, ma'am," without looking up. In a different life, she would have kept moving. In this one, something in the sticker snagged her attention, not the font, the spacing. It was one of a series she'd approved for a hospital subsidiary months ago. The spacing was off by half a kerning unit. Graves, she said into the lapel mic she wasn't supposed to be wearing in a hospital. We have a biomed tech in pediatric with a fake label. I'm in a gown, Graves replied, bone dry. But I'm listening. She turned casually, eyes back on the cart. The wheels were wrong. No hospital buys casters with that grease cap anymore. Too messy. The man pushed past a restricted door without looking at the keypad and vanished into the utility corridor beyond. Liam was coming toward her, coffee refilled. She palmed his wrist and, without explanation, cut left into the same door, catching it before it latched. The concrete corridor hummed with building systems, a space Liam understood the way a sailor understands current. He's not biomed, Aveline whispered. Wheels. Label. He didn't badge. Liam's eyes mapped the hallway. Electrical, oxygen, nurse call risers, a turn that should dead end except it didn't. Server rooms that way, he said. And the ICU gas manifold. They followed at a distance, footsteps swallowed by the white noise of air handlers. At the next junction, the man with the cart should have turned right toward clinical engineering. Instead, he muscled the cart through a door marked O2 manifold, authorized personnel only. Liam didn't think. He moved. The door hadn't latched. He slipped through into a tight room lined with green cylinders and regulator banks, the air cool and metallic. The fake tech had already popped a panel and was threading a line from the cart into a low-pressure feed. Stop, Liam said, voice landing harder than he felt. Leave the line. Hands where I can see them. The man looked up with flat eyes that didn't match his uniform. For a heartbeat the room held its breath. Then he reached for his tool pouch. Graves hit him from behind like a steel door. Hospital gown, for pull, bare feet, none of it slowed him. The three bodies crashed into the cart. A tray clanged, spilling fittings. The line the man had been threading kinked and spat a sweet chemical smell that didn't belong to oxygen. Halocarbon suppressant. Graves grunted, pinning the man's wrist at an angle that made it a decision. Enough to drop a wing. Aveline was already on the radio, voice clipped. Lockdown. Pediatric and neurogas manifold compromised. Code gray, code red. Within 30 seconds the room filled with people who could end wars with checklists, facilities, nurses, a fire lieutenant with soot in his hair and command in his bones. The fake tech was cuffed to a gurney and vanishing down a different corridor under federal escort. A chem strip turned a color the fire lieutenant didn't like. Evans arrived as the last cylinder was being swapped. Shaw? He asked. Or someone who likes their money, Graves said, breathing hard, the 4-bag swinging at his shoulder like an absurd accessory. He had a tattoo under the collarbone. Atria's triangle. Atria Biosanitation, the waste partner, in Finch's paperwork and the dotted line in Liam's notes. Evans didn't smile. He exhaled through his nose like a man whose day just got simpler to explain and harder to finish. We'll pull their entire payroll into a box. They reconvened in the war room 10 minutes later, hospital alarms silenced, adrenaline sloshing through their systems. Evans set his pad down. 2 fronts, he said. Hospital sabotage failed. Good. Court in 90 minutes. Less good. Shaw's TRO is aggressive and assigned to Judge Cates, who likes to say balance of equities a lot. Then we change the balance, Aveline said. She turned to her in-house counsel, a woman who had written half the city's NDAs. Draft a voluntary disclosure. Everything clinical, redacted for patient identifiers, goes to the NIH and posted to an open repository under a CCBY license. Today. Counsel blinked. You're releasing our internal data? I'm releasing the truth, Aveline said. If Shaw wants to argue trade secrets, let them do it in front of 10 million people and 3,000 clinicians. Evans's pen paused. You'll make enemies who don't use lawyers. I already did, she said, glancing toward the bruises ripening along Graves' ribs. We move anyway. By 4 o'clock, a temporary website no one had slept to build was live. A stark white page labeled Langford, Burn Institute in clean type, a mission statement written in plain English, and a dump of raw, de-identified data that made Vance's spreadsheets look like fiction. The site buckled under load and then held as more servers slid under it. In Judge Cates's wood-paneled courtroom, Shaw's lead counsel stood like a dark lighthouse and talked about proprietary vectors and catastrophic market harm. When it was her turn, Aveline didn't perform outrage. She submitted exhibits with surgical economy, Helios wire transfers, Vance's disciplinary record, a still of the amber bag being tagged into evidence, a line from Finch to procurement reading post-transfer asset liquidation per protocol. When counsel objected to the phrase's meaning, Evans, present as a government observer, offered to put a paramedic on the stand who could describe the oxygen manifold tampering from an hour earlier. Judge Cates rubbed the bridge of his nose and asked 2 questions that went straight to bones. Ms. Langford, did you fund the research at issue? Yes. Is it your position that the defendants used your funds to endanger human subjects and falsify results? Yes. He looked at the ceiling like it sometimes held answers. TRO denied. Parties will brief a preliminary injunction on a normal schedule. Outside, microphones bloomed like flowers. Aveline spoke once and left. We're not talking about stock price. We're talking about people. We'll see you at trial. Vance flipped that night. It happened quietly, in a windowless room with a pitcher of water and 2 lawyers who didn't stop looking bored until he said the number of subjects who had died on his protocol and the 4-letter nickname Finch used for the amber infusion when he wanted to sound like a pirate and not a doctor. He said cobalt as if the word itself could be a defense. It wasn't. He drew a diagram of the false data pipeline whose simplicity made everyone in the room feel stupid for not seeing it sooner. Evans came out of the proffer and didn't bother to hide the fatigue under his eyes. We'll have Finch in irons by morning, he said. Shaw's general counsel just retained counsel of her own. Back on the pediatric floor, the world shrank again. Maya's room smelled like crayons and antiseptic. Someone had stuck glow-in-the-dark stars to the ceiling. She lay on her side, lashes on her cheek, a picture she'd drawn propped against the footboard, A sun with too many rays, labeled in shaky block letters Maya's sun. Liam watched her breathe and tried not to replay oxygen cylinders and halon in his head. There was a soft knock. Aveline, still in her jacket, stepped into the doorway and then to the chair by the window, respect making her smaller even when money could have made her larger. "How's the gate?" she asked. "Strong," Liam said. "We had help." Silence settled like a blanket they could share without trying to warm each other. After a while he said, "They're going to come at you harder now. They're going to come at us." She corrected, then softened it with a sideways look. "A name. For the thing we're building." He smiled, a small, tired thing that somehow reached his eyes. "The Langford Burn Institute?" Her mouth ticked. "We can workshop the order later." She stood. "We'll start compassionate use protocols as soon as the IRB signs off. Kellen can't be the only one who gets a chance to come back from this. Maya won't have to wait for a deck with lies to decide if she lives." He nodded, fear and relief braided so tightly he couldn't tell which one was making his hands shake. "Thank you. You already did this," she said again, as if rehearsing the truth could make it fit. Near midnight, the fire alarm on the ICU side tripped. Not a drill. The tone was different, lower, insistent, a sound designed to pry you out of whatever you thought you were doing. Red strobes washed the hallway. A voice came over the intercom with the calm you only hear when someone practiced it for years. "Code Red, Neuro ICU. Code Red." Graves, who had been patrolling a loop that would have embarrassed a healthier man, stepped into the corridor with his gown knotted like a cape and his four-pole trundling behind him. "We're done with coincidences," he said. They moved as a unit, Aveline, Graves, Liam, past a nurse already on a phone, past the resident tugging on gloves with a grim efficiency that read as fear if you knew what to look for. Smoke wasn't rolling. There was no heat. But the lights were failing in a pattern, ovals of shadow blooming and collapsing along the ceiling as if something were sucking the building's electricity in pulses. "Not fire," Liam said, watching the rhythm, hearing a sound under the alarm that didn't belong. "Power. Someone's dropping the UPS to force a failover." "To what end?" Aveline asked. "To reset the monitors," Graves said. "To hide a spike." They hit the ICU doors as a breaker somewhere boomed and the hall went dim, backup lights stuttering on a half-second later. Through the glass, Kellen lay motionless, his monitor flickering, then blinking blank before crawling back to life. A shape moved at the edge of the room, too smooth for a nurse, wrong height for the night shift attending. The door badge flashed red. Graves didn't bother with the badge. He put his shoulder to the panic bar and drove. The door popped under muscle and bad hinges. The shape turned. For an instant, Liam saw a face he recognized in only one way, by the absence in the eyes. The intruder's hand dipped toward the line running to Kellen's vein. Liam moved without thinking. He hit the man at the belt and drove him into the monitor stand. They went down in a sprawl of legs and stainless, the alarm screeching around them like a thing with a throat. Aveline was already at the bed, hands on the line, tracing it to a port that hadn't been there an hour ago. She yanked it, tape ripping, plastic snapping. The monitor flatlined for one hideous beat and then, awakened by its own panic, began to tick again. Graves pinned the intruder with a forearm across the neck, the gown gaping, the 4 lines strummed like a ridiculous, fragile instrument. "You should have stayed with cylinders," he said between breaths. "Less intimate." Security flooded the room. Evans a half-minute later, looking like he'd been waiting in the hallway for the day to do this. He took one look, made one call, and the hospital turned into a fortress again. Lobby sealed, elevators locked, a camera feed shunted to a van outside that could see the way a city sees. The intruder said nothing. He didn't need to. The rig in his pocket did it for him, a tiny loop transmitter broadcasting to nobody now that the room was a Faraday cage for all the attention it was getting. Evans held it up in a gloved hand. "They wanted a spike on a dead monitor," he said. "And a narrative. He was too weak. We did all we could." Aveline stood at the foot of her brother's bed and watched the green line argue with death in small, stubborn increments. "Not tonight," she said. It was after 2 when the floor quieted. The night nurse reset the alarm volume from siren to song. Graves allowed himself to be steered back to his room by a nurse who'd stopped asking questions the first time she heard oxygen manifold. Evans disappeared toward a bank of elevators with 2 agents and a man in zip ties who would, by dawn, be regretting everything about Atria's onboarding process. Liam sat in a plastic chair outside Kellen's room and put his head in his hands. The quiet wasn't quiet. He could still hear the alarm in the bones behind his ears. A shadow crossed his lap. He looked up. Aveline leaned her shoulder against the opposite wall, legs crossed at the ankle in a posture that tried for nonchalance and landed on gratitude. "We still have court in 5 hours," she said. "We'll make it," he said. "We will," she agreed. "But before that, one more thing." "What?" She nodded down the hall toward pediatrics. "You should go tell Maya that the stars on her ceiling are still in the same place." He stood, joints remembering the shaft and the crawl. He took 3 steps, then paused. "When this ends," he said, and didn't know how to finish it without sounding like hope had made him foolish. "When this ends," she supplied, "we go outside. Ocean or sun? Your pick." He smiled without meaning to. "She'll pick both." A flicker stuttered down the corridor again, lights hesitating, then catching. The building made a sound like it was resetting itself to a story it preferred. Tomorrow would be the hearing, the press, the signatures, the part where the world decided what to do with the truth. Tonight, it was enough that tubes ran clean and monitors told the truth and a child slept under plastic stars that glowed because they had been given light and held onto it. They would need all of it for the morning. Dawn broke metallic and thin. 5 hours after the ICU blackout and the failed line switch, the courthouse at Foley Square felt like a submarine, fluorescence, marble, hush. Reporters stacked like cordwood outside. Inside, the case moved with the cold efficiency of a machine that had been waiting to be turned on. Dr. Alistair Finch shuffled in wearing shackles and yesterday's arrogance. Dr. Corbin Vance sat at counsel table 2 seats away, flanked by attorneys who looked like they charged by the heartbeat. The U.S. attorney read counts that landed like hammer blows: conspiracy, wire fraud, FCPA violations, human subject endangerment, obstruction. Finch tried to speak, something about unprecedented science and necessary risks, until the judge cut him with a rap of wood that sounded final. "Bail?" the judge asked without looking up. "Remand," the prosecutor said. "Risk of flight, risk of witness tampering, ongoing attempts to destroy evidence. This court heard a code read at a hospital 2 hours ago." "Remanded," the judge said. Vance's counsel rose to note cooperation. The judge nodded once. The words, "proffer agreement," entered the record like a key sliding home. Outside, microphones blossomed. Aveline Langford faced them once. "We are cooperating fully with federal authorities," she said. "This is about people, not patents." She didn't wait for questions. By afternoon, the Langford Burn Institute website steadied under a surge of traffic nobody tried to throttle. De-identified datasets, raw lab notes, instrument calibration files, everything that could be safely public went public under a license clinicians could use without asking permission. NIH pinned the page. Forums that had ignored corporate pressers for years began stitching protocols together like quilts. At St. Bartholomew's, the work took a different shape. A temporary IRB convened, then stayed, then reconvened with outside ethicists because that was the only way this would be clean. The compassionate use program drafted from scratch in a 20-page doc at 2 a.m. stabilized into something that could withstand sunlight. One rule repeated in bold at the top of every page: assume no miracle. Assume the patient first. Maya Byrne and Kellen Langford were patient 0001 and 0002. The first dose happened 3 days later, not with cameras but with a nurse who hummed out of tune when she was nervous. Liam stood at the head of Maya's bed, the ocean and sun debate postponed until needles were out. Aveline stood 2 floors up with Kellen, sleeves rolled to the elbow, listening to a heart that had finally decided to keep time. Graves, yellow socks peeking under the hem of a hospital gown, took first watch in the pediatric lounge with his 4-pole parked like a weapon. He had not asked permission to be there. The city roared and forgot and roared again. Shaw Industries' general counsel resigned at dusk the following Tuesday. Atria Biosanitation CO found himself describing procurement emails to people who did not smile. Evans came and went like weather, tired, unsentimental, chewing through names. He never forgot to bring coffee. Aveline returned to the Langford boardroom once, not to ask but to inform. "We're dissolving the subsidiary," she said. "The proceeds endow the institute. We will not rebuild the thing we just burned." A director asked about quarterly guidance. She answered with a link. "Read the mission. Adjust your expectations." In the hospital, progress measured itself in mean, stubborn increments. Kellen blinked and then tracked and then squeezed his sister's hand with something like intent. Maya's tremor retreated so gradually that Liam didn't trust it until he realized he'd stopped bracing a cup for her without noticing. 1 week turned into 2. "Ocean or sun?" Aveline asked in a hallway that had become the center of her map. "Both," Liam said. "She'll pick both." They drove east on a rare clear Saturday, not far, just to a quiet inlet off the Sound where the water learned to be patient against a slatted dock. A rented day sailor rocked in its slip, white hull scuffed from a life of forgiving mistakes. Kellen came on crutches and then, stubbornly, without them, Graves a step behind like a shadow with a limp. Maya skipped, Sun Hat Askew, narrating constellations nobody could see in daylight. "Step aboard," Kellen murmured, his voice low but his eyes alive. He ran a palm over the tiller like a man greeting an old friend. For 10 minutes they didn't talk about hospitals or hearings or anything with a docket number. The sail snapped once, bellied, and then filled. The boat leaned obediently into wind. Water hissed along the rail. The city, ruthless, magnificent, shrunk to a line on the horizon while the sun did the thing Maya loved it for, flooding everything with proof. Aveline sat on the windward bench and let her brother steer. Liam watched Maya measure the world not in fear but in angles and light. Graves watched all of them and pretended he wasn't. None of it felt like an ending, it felt like a page they had earned. 6 months later, summer was working out how to be fall. The house was modest and quiet on a tree-lined street in a town that did not show up on maps of money. The oak in the yard threw coins of light onto the grass. The porch held the kind of chairs you buy because someone tells you they last forever. Maya ran. She didn't stumble. Her laugh caught in the leaves and kept ringing even when she was already at the other end of the yard. Kellen, stronger, leaned on a cane that had started to feel like an accessory instead of a sentence. He lobbed a soccer ball back with the kind of care that says, "I know exactly how many miracles got us here." Graves sat in the shade, a book on his knee he wasn't reading, the old soldier's smile that appears when the perimeter is finally, improbably, quiet. Inside, a printer on a desk nobody cared about anymore hummed out grant approvals under a letterhead that now had 2 names. The institute had a waiting list and a budget measured in commas but spoke like a clinic, not a corporation. A team in Palo Alto replicated a safety result. A group in Boston published the first peer-reviewed paper with a conclusion that didn't lie. The open repository had become an ecosystem. The comments were sometimes feral, often brilliant, always public. Aveline stepped onto the porch with 2 glasses of lemonade. She handed one to Liam. Their fingers touched, a small, ordinary contact that felt less ordinary than it looked. "Board tried to give me a bonus," she said, amusement dry as the wood under their feet. "What did you do with it?" he asked. "Gave it to a night maintenance guy who knew more about systems than the men I paid to build them." She let that sit a second. "You're still not taking the title I offered." "I'll take the work," he said. "Jobs I understand. Titles make my teeth itch." "Then systems specialist it is," she said. "Your desk is still nowhere." He laughed, short, surprised, real. On the lawn, Maya lined up 2 folding chairs as goalposts and drilled the ball dead center. She threw her arms up, glorying as if the U.S. women's team were calling from the sidelines to tell her to get ready. "Look at them," Aveline said, words softer than anyone had heard from her in a boardroom. The ice that had kept her functional melted into something with heat and spine. 6 months ago, I was buying a lie because it was dressed like hope. And I was tearing my life apart because it was the only way to make you listen, he said. That's what heroes are, you know, she said without looking over. People who refuse to accept the world as is when somebody they love is on the line. At the edge of the lawn, Graves cleared his throat theatrically. You two planning to keep complimenting each other, or is somebody going to help me with the grill? Maya sprinted up the steps, thrust a paper at them. Fresh crayon smell, lines confident. Not a castle this time. A house under an enormous sun. 5 stick figures under an oak, a man with a cane, a little girl in a yellow shirt, a grumpy guardian with a book, and in the middle, a man and a woman standing a little closer than an explanation required. Liam swallowed. The lump didn't go away when he smiled. Frame it? He asked. Hang it in the lobby, Aveline said, and then shook her head. No. Kitchen. The lobby can wait. The sun slid, painting the porch in late light. The ball thumped. Somewhere a neighbor's dog negotiated with a squirrel. On a nightstand inside, a phone blinked once with an email from Stanford, Vector Revision version 1.1 approved for Phase 1, and then stilled, because good news didn't have to sprint anymore. Ocean or sun? Aveline asked, tipping her glass toward the yard. Both, Liam said. Always both. For a long, unremarkable minute, they let the afternoon be exactly what it was, a porch, a tree, 5 people who had earned the right to be here by walking through a door nobody else could see. They had started in a city of marble lobbies and locked rooms, of polished sedans and shredded paper. They had walked through pipes and fire alarms and the kind of courtrooms that rewrite names. They had arrived, for now, in a square of sunlight that felt like a promise kept,